Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about language acquisition and what is language acquisition. So although how children learn to speak is not perfectly understood, most explanations involve the observation that children copy what they hear and the inference that human beings have a natural aptitude for understanding grammar. So children usually learn the sounds and vocabulary of their native language through imitation, and grammar is seldom taught to them. And so what is language? As we know, language is a system of symbols and rules that enable us to communicate. And it's a symbolic code used in communication. And the systematic, meaningful arrangement. Language acquisition, representation, and processing. So language acquisition, so is language acquired, or how is it learned? How is language representation? How are the symbols of language represented in memory? And language processing. What factors influence the processing of language? So how are language acquisition, representation, and processing related? So and acquisition leads to a set of representations. And language use is the processing of these representations. In language acquisition, some of the major issues for first language acquisition is language disorders or loss or linguistic deprivation. And how does our general intelligence interact with our biological predispositions? So the critical period hypothesis, there's a biological basis of language learning. And how do we learn our native language? What are the steps? What are the stages? So for language acquisition, you have language development, you have the phonological development, semantic development, and the syntactic development in syntactic categories. So from babbling to full sentences, we learn what things mean, so semantics, and acquire concepts. We learn the syntax of our language. So for language acquisition, our second language acquisition, factors that affect our chances of learning our second language are individual differences. So that would be working memory span and the age of acquisition effects. So the time at which you began learning your second language, the environment of learning. So was it a classroom versus immersion style of instruction? And the style of instruction, was it um, instruction, was it an association between translations, or was it directly to concepts? So for example, conejo is rabbit, or we shown an image of a rabbit and associated it with that word as a concept. And there's the stages of second language acquisition, which then so the language processing. The language comprehension is the lexical ambiguity resolution, such as spade, and then syntactic ambiguity resolution of fly. So when a person hears the word fly, what's the first thing you think of? It could mean to fly like in an airplane, it could be the fly like the insect. So there's some of that ambiguity there. And there's the imaginability, and other word factors. So language production is the lexicalization, or the stages of processing, and a lemma is a representation that includes both semantic and syntactic information for a word, but not its phonological word form. And during selecting during lemma selection, a semantically appropriate item is selected and is specified with respect to syntax, but not phonology. And during word form or lexeme retrieval, phonological specification occurs. So when the phonological features of the to-be-produced word become activated. And word naming and models, so there's the dual route model, analogy model, and connectionist model. So what is bilingualism? Bilingualism is the ability to master the use of two languages, while multilingualism is the ability to master the use of more than two languages. And although bilingualism is relatively rare among native speakers of English, in many parts of the world it is the standard, rather than the expectation to know at least two languages. And bilingualism and multilingualism are often involve different degrees of competence in the languages involved. So a person may control one language better than the other, or they might have mastered both of the languages equally but for different purposes. For example, using one language for speaking and another for writing.